Welcome to the National Civil Rights Museum's Imagining America podcast. Today's episode is perspectives on today's civil rights movement. And our guest is Michael Eric Dyson. A distinguished professor, gifted writer, and prominent media personality, Dr. Dyson has taught at some of the nation's most prestigious universities, including Princeton, Brown, and Georgetown, and is currently a distinguished university professor at Vanderbilt University. He has authored over 25 books, including 7 New York Times bestsellers. He has won numerous awards for his literary achievements, including the 2020 Langston Hughes Medal, the American Book Award, and 2 NAACP Image Awards. So, Dr. Dyson.
Yes, sir.
You're at the National Civil Rights Museum. You've written on Dr. King.
Yes, sir.
You have studied him in a way that few people have, and you've been writing on civil rights for a long time.
Yes, sir.
Too often, people closest to the work get overlooked. You've had the opportunity to be close to the work and maybe distance from the work a little bit.
Right.
Could you speak to how people closest to the work get accounted for when we think about the civil rights movement?
That's a great question, Doc. It is true that when you have a larger-than-life figure like Dr. King, an iconic figure who transformed America through his rhetoric, through his vision, through his imagination, we all know, those of us who study, that he didn't do it by himself, that he was produced by a movement, that Ella Baker said that the movement produced Dr. King, not vice versa. Dr. King didn't produce the movement. Having said that, try it without him. Black people are not interchangeable. And Dr. King was a unique figure who was uniquely outfitted to carry on the mission that he pursued for the balance of his mere 12 years in public life, when you think about it. But when you reflect on the folk up close, the Joanne Robinsons, who's using stencil, young people don't even know what that means. Putting the ink-laden paper on a barrel and turning it to produce a mimeograph, to produce a poster or a leaflet. When we think about E.D. Nixon, the heroic working class hero, who really was a major spur to the Montgomery bus boycott. So when we think about people like that, we know that those intimately acquainted with the transactions of history are not always acknowledged fully in the record for who they are. But that's the beauty of all of these civil rights histories that come out on local histories. What happened to the bus boycott in Baton Rouge? What happened with Claudette Colvin, who was who presaged Rosa Parks? When we think about Ida B. Wells Barnett years and years ago, or we think about Septima Clark, or we think about figures who were so central to defining movements in particular arenas within African American culture and within American society. So having studied this through 2 books on Dr. King and on the civil rights movement, I think it's extremely important to say that there were a few committed, conscientious individuals. You know, when I hear young people ask, well, you know, what can we do? How could we ever match what they did? Well, it wasn't but a few of them. I remember asking Jesse Jackson once, I said, how could you as a 26-year-old kid weasel your way into the inner circle of Martin Luther King Jr.? He said, the line wasn't long to go die with Martin Luther King Jr., right? That wasn't no line that people were trying to get involved with, to be able to carry the weight and the burden of struggle for that group, for that outfit, for those people. And then, having studied this history, you know, the tensions inevitably between, say, SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Now, we know of the famous or infamous evolution under Stokely Carmichael away from John Lewis, and what they became, a radical revolutionary group that Ella Baker tutored in the art of leaderfulness, multiple leaders operating simultaneously to prosecute wars in multiple theaters. versus the kind of top-down hierarchy that King favored coming out of the Black Baptist Church. But there were tremendous tensions, you know. They clowned him behind his back, called him DeLaud, you know, and got resentful. You're bringing the cameras and stuff on work we've been doing for like a year and a half. So, you know, Bob Moses and Diane Nash and the like. John Lewis always was an outlier because he was always a king man, even in that group. So you see the tremendous tensions, and I think about it now with Black Lives Matter versus, say, National Action Network with Reverend Al Sharpton. But what's instructive is that the sense of commitment that folk like King had and folk like Snick had, that regardless of personality clashes or differences, and we could throw in Roy Wilkins of the NAACP, who was always battling, so to speak, with King et al., Thurgood Marshall, who thought it was nearly barbaric to be marching in the streets as opposed to what's going on in legal theaters of jurisprudence. So when you study that history up close, many figures were acknowledged, many more figures have not been sung in the hymn book of acknowledgement for the civil rights movement.
Yeah. Well, as you always do, you spark interest and curiosity in so many ways in your commentary. And
thank you, sir.
A couple things you mentioned in particular, I just want to reference back to. Mentioning somebody like E.D. Nixon brought a smile to my face because I went straight to his connection as a sleeping car porter, and then you go to A. Philip Randolph and the precursor, if you will, and how influential he was, and then you talk about the tensions, which I think too often we don't acknowledge the tensions today.
That's true.
And it allows us to romanticize the movement in a way that I'm not sure ultimately is best.
Right.
And that leads me to an area of focus that we have here at the museum in particular right now at this very moment. And that is, how do we make sure young people, our youth in particular, understand not just yesterday's movement, but how today and tomorrow's movement has to unfold or could unfold? How do we both inspire and create space for their imagination, their courage and conviction to manifest?
Yeah, that's why you're the host and I'm just a guy hanging out with you talking. That's a beautiful way of framing it. And it is true what you say, that when we romanticize that history, we also paper over the inevitable differences of opinion that mark today's discourse, but thinking, oh, we're somehow out of step. They didn't do that back then. Everybody agreed with everybody. No, they didn't. Roy Wilkins was hating on King. When there were the March on Washington, the speech, everybody was jockeying to be first because there was only one camera, CBS. Now, I know it's hard for young people. Get ready, y'all. There's only 3 channels. Oh, my God, don't fall out. And at night, when the channels went off, dun, 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 they're playing the national anthem. That's it. Game's over. John Wayne's movie is about to end in half, and it's done.
Snowflakes on the screen.
Come on, bro. Until 8 o'clock the next morning, you young people would have a hissy fit. They got thousands of sports channels alone. We had 3 major stations, CBS, NBC, and ABC. And CBS, I think, had signed on to cover the march, but that was it. And then they thought, like anything else, they'll cover the first few speakers, and then they'll cut away. But what they didn't anticipate was the groundswell of interest. Now 250,000 people. That doesn't sound like a lot. That's a whole bunch of people, especially then. And so not only did CBS stay, ABC and NBC joined. Oh my God. Now you've got, the convergence of, so many multiple media sites and the wide coverage of this event. Just as one example, the internecine squabbling. Can James Baldwin speak? No, he's supposed to speak, but we can't get him. The cardinal. If you allow John Lewis to make this speech, John Lewis, who was seen as a paragon of virtue now, John Lewis was seen then as a revolutionary who was going to upset the apple cart of the black movement for social justice and civil rights struggle. So there was all that stuff going on behind the scenes. And Martin Luther King Jr. was besmirched, was colored as a kind of bourgeois Negro by the younger people because he liked silk pajamas. But he was giving away all of his money, $240,000 back in 62, 63. That's a lot of cheddar right now. But back then, That was amazing money. And he was giving it all to the movement. So there were tensions, there were squabbles, there were differences of opinion, there were arguments, even within King's own group, SCLC. You know, at one time when Andrew Young ended up agreeing with Hosea Williams and Jesse Jackson, he took him aside. What are you doing, bro? I need you to be the right wing. I need you to be the Uncle Tom. I need you to stake out the right wing position so I can come down the middle and try to adjudicate between these two claims. So when you deny history, you deny that. The colorful part of it, the interesting part of it, the brutal part of it, the ugly part of it, the jealousy, the personal traits that were at stake, that some people liked others and didn't dig others. Martin Luther King Jr. nearly came to blows with Whitney Young over arguing over the Vietnam War and the degree to which King should be a critic of the Vietnam War as opposed to supporting LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, not LeBron James, y'all, who certainly had been critical to the Civil Rights Movement with the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 65 Voting Rights Act, and in the aftermath of King's death, quickly passing the Fair Housing Act. So that's the holy trinity of civil rights legislation. The point is, it wasn't all a Sunday school picnic. The point is, there were differences of opinion. And we have to remind young people of that. So when young people sometimes get on their high horses, we're Black Lives Matter, we don't do those kind of things you old Negroes do. We don't, excuse me? Because y'all beefing. This branch of Black Lives Matter don't like that branch. These people over here doing this. You're mad at Martin Luther King Jr. and the early generation for buying silk pajamas. You got a $9 million house in California for self-care. But you're mad at Reverend Al Sharpton. So there are these tensions today, but what we can do, as they did then, is understand we can overcome those differences because we're focused on the bigger picture. Voting rights then, 1963, 64, 65, what's going on now with the struggle for voting rights, when we think about voter ID, when we think about gerrymandering, when we think about redrawing districts, when we think about the incredible use of IDs to try to block people from voting, these are struggles that are evergreen right now.
So 60 years ago, what happened is akin to 6 years ago.
Yes.
If you will. We need to make that connection much more explicit.
Absolutely. And if we don't, we fail to teach our young people the rules of the road, so to speak, the negotiating points of history, how people argue and disagree and fight, but come together at critical times, have a sense of solidarity that transcends the kind of internal divisions that might prevail. And when we do that, we honor not only the historical record, but we honor the messy way in which history is made.
Yeah.
You know, and we're here to remind young people that you're not outliers. You are in the central movement of history, and the same things you're dealing with now, people were dealing with then. We've got to find a way to overcome those differences in order to make a difference.
Yeah. I love that. It makes me think about how do we manage to compel people to understand subtlety and nuance. And sometimes today it doesn't feel like we have much of that, but I do think this is a moment. I do think understanding subtlety and nuance, particularly if you are committed to civil and human rights and social justice.
Yes.
It has to be a part of your repertoire.
Yes.
When you are signed up for that work.
Yes.
How do we make people and allow people and facilitate people to do that today?
I'm so glad you said that, because unfortunately, among so many of the younger generation, this cancel culture, I disagree with you, you're out. I disagree with you, you're wiped out. I disagree with you, you are wrong, you are evil, you are unalterably opposed to any righteous sense of commitment to social justice. And the tragedy is that ain't nobody got all the truth. The great Howard Thurman, who was an inspiration to Martin Luther King Jr., whose book, Jesus and the Disinherited, King carried in his valise across the country as a roadmap to using religion to challenge the unequal, unjust social order, Howard Thurman said, you can go to the Atlantic Ocean. You can dip your glass in the Atlantic Ocean. It may be full of the Atlantic Ocean, but it's not all the Atlantic Ocean. It's like truth. You can be full of the truth. Everything you say is true, but it ain't all the truth. No one person, no one group, no one slant, no one community or organization or approach, methodology, vision, angle of vision, perspective has the truth. We have to check each other, balance each other, help each other, remind each other, encourage each other, legitimately and not viciously criticize each other, hold each other accountable. And nuance is extremely important. But nuance doesn't occur when you think you're righteous and you're on the right side and everybody else is wrong, right? Martin Luther King Jr. said, don't go out here this morning in a church sermon saying that I'm a saint. I'm not. He knew I'm a human being. I'm flawed, I'm fragile, I'm marked by my own failure to live up to the noble ideals that I espouse, but I'm committed to the fight. And that kind of nuance is extremely important. It's going to be very important, for instance, in 2027, when the FBI releases the cache of tapes it has of Martin Luther King Jr. that they should have never
We may be
possessed.
remotely interested in that here at the National Civil Rights
I
Museum.
think sometimes you might be. And the thing is that we already know that Dr. King was a flawed and man who was hounded by his own beliefs, his own practices, some of the contradictions to his own beliefs. We don't have to dismiss him, the greatness of what he represented, to understand and embrace the fact that, yes, he was flawed. Yes, he was limited. Yes, he was a sexist in some ways. Yes, he did things that we look upon now and we think are very problematic. But when we put him in the context of his times and as he emerged, we see what a remarkably singular figure he was. And we have to exercise a kind of historic forgiveness. Not dismissal, not failure to criticize, but to embrace a flawed figure without whom we wouldn't be what we're doing. We wouldn't be who we are today and not doing what we do today.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, nuance is especially important and welcome. And we have to teach young people, ain't nobody perfect, you know? And since you ain't perfect, don't judge other people who aren't. And understand you have to have grace for yourself and others. And as you accept the failures and flaws, while criticizing the consequences of them, we learn to accentuate our common humanity and also the common pursuit of the noble dreams and aspirations that we pursue.
Thank you for that. One of the areas that we're particularly focused on at the National Civil Rights Museum is being a catalyst for positive social change. It's rooted in our mission. We take it very seriously, and we understand that what that means for people based on their point of entry, if you will, can vary. How do we stay hopeful and positive about this work of civil and human rights and social justice when it can be noisy, if you will, in the atmosphere of our society?
Yeah.
How do we stay hopeful so that we can help others be hopeful?
Yeah, that's a great question. And look, again, to quote Howard Thurman, and I'm going to paraphrase him, he said, never reduce your dreams to the event that you experience. So he said, our slave foreparents, and had visions of stuff that was way beyond what they were experiencing. They were enslaved people. The long rows of cotton, the rawhide whip of the overseer beating down upon their flesh. And yet they imagined a world that transcended that. If enslaved people could do that, people who are fighting an orange apparition, beclouding the political horizon, can do that too. People who are facing a right-wing revanchist politics, a resurgent and recrudescent bigotry, can do that too. Because as bad as it is now, it ain't as bad as it has been. If you think it's bad to have a choice between people you think are not ideal, on a ballot, imagine people who didn't vote at all because they couldn't. So even they wished that they could vote for the lesser of two evils.
So I'm going to stop you right there because
Right.
I've got one more question and
Right.
I've got to
Right.
speak to it. Let's talk about voting. Does it still matter?
Absolutely. I'll tell you why voting matters. Because had we had a different outcome, 3 people on the Supreme Court would not be there now. Because they were appointed by a president. Of course they were nominated. They had to pass. But the point is that that man in office chose to swing the court far right. And if he never comes back into office, he will have affected American political destiny for the next 30 years. Voting matters because not only who's president and who can appoint Supreme Court justices and nominate them for confirmation, but also your state's attorneys or your prosecutors or the people who choose to address police people who misbehave, who are granted immunity, qualified immunity, or those Republican legislators who we redraw maps. And 38 out of 50 state legislatures are run by Republicans, and they are redrawing the map of American political demography and destiny. So it makes a big difference. And all these people who are too cool for school, I'm not going to vote for either. They're the same thing. You're nuts. They're not the same thing. One side is not the other. One particular route is not the other. One cherishes the ability of democracy to correct itself. The other wants to impose its will as the very litmus test of what legitimate democracy is. It's either our way or no way. It's the Frank Sinatra bulldozing, bullying school. I did it my way, not the American way, which is to vote. And if you lose, vote again the next time around. But don't try to rejigger democracy so that it takes the shape of your partisan politics. And January 6th proves that. It's always January 6th on the black calendar because we always see people wilding out and forgetting the very principles by which they claim to live. So in that sense, Martin Luther King Jr. was right in quoting Arnold Toynbee, the great British historian. It may be the Negro, the African American, the black person, who will inject meaning into the veins of Western civilization and end up saving this thing. The very thing. It ain't about making America great again. Make America great first time. Make America what it used to be. Langston Hughes said, America never was America to me. Make America the full promise of the delivery of democracy that we claim to be part of. That's the beauty of voting. And young people, you got to get out there. Just because you don't get what you want the first time around, grow up. That's the nature of life. You vote once, you vote twice, you vote 3 times, you vote 4 times, you might vote 5 times. You keep voting. Look at the right wing. They laid in wait for 50 years to overturn Roe versus Wade. We have to exercise some kind of ethical patience and moral delay of gratification in order to achieve the transcendent goals that we think we aim for.
A scholar and a gentleman, thank you for your insight, your wisdom, your passion for this work, not just today, but yesterday and tomorrow.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
I know we barely scratched the surface on this topic. We encourage our listeners to follow us on social media and to subscribe to the museum's Imagine in America podcast series. Today's episode is brought to you by the National Civil Rights Museum, located at the Lorraine Motel, the assassination site of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It chronicles key episodes of the American Civil Rights Movement, examines today's global civil and human rights issues, provokes thoughtful debate, and serves as a catalyst for positive social change.